Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ethan Orfe, and we're going to go ahead and get right into it. I hope everyone had a fantastic Christmas. My Christmas was pretty good. Thought it was nice. Watched some basketball. NBA hoops was always on Christmas, so had to go. I sat there and watched a lot of basketball. Actually, I watched some Pelicans play, my team, and we got the W. That was nice. Brandon Ingram, 7 threes, max contract. I'm expecting to see it. But anywho, that was a few days ago, and on Saturday was the start of the college football playoffs. LSU versus Oklahoma, Ohio State versus Clemson. One game was not so good as far as the score went by, and another game was really good. So we're gonna get involved in some of those games coming up later on in the topics. But for now, let's stick with what did we learn from Saturday? Or what did I learn from Saturday, at least? So, the first thing that I learned from Saturday is there's no need for expansion talks anymore for at least the next 6 months, the next 6-7 months. We don't need to talk about expanding the playoffs. We don't need 6 teams. Definitely don't need 8 teams. It's where it needs to be. You want to know why? Because at the end of the day, there are not that many national championship caliber teams right now in college football. Oklahoma, although injuries, although suspensions, they missed a lot of players on that field. However, at the end of the day, the display of just not being in the same class as LSU was very apparent. There's always supposed to be the next man up, right? College should not have the differential that it just showed as far as talent from Oklahoma. If Oklahoma was a top 4 candidate, the score shouldn't have reflected that way in the first place. That was a drubbing, a beatdown of the loss that Oklahoma got. And honestly, it was surprising. It was literally surprising. I remember watching the game, and at this point it was, I believe, 14-7. I was like, okay, Oklahoma might have a chance they can score the ball and really get something going here. And then, of course, they didn't convert. They had to turn the ball over, turnover on downs and whatnot. And I went to make a phone call, and that was only maybe like 5 minutes. I turn around, LSU scores again. Jordan Jefferson. At the point where I was starting to feel like that game was out of hand, of course, was how they just couldn't, their secondary could not handle LSU whatsoever. And we're going to get into more why I feel like LSU's receiving core might be too dangerous for anybody that they would have faced in the playoff. But Oklahoma just wasn't prepared to handle the onslaught of weapons that LSU has. And Joe Burrow it was surgical what he was doing on the field. They would send some pressure, and he would just feel it out. He was unfazed. Literally an unfazed person in that pocket. Unfazed. So when you really look at just the talent level that was on display, across those three teams in LSU, Clemson, and Ohio State, there was really not a chance for Clemson, healthy or not. I'm sorry, there was not a chance for Oklahoma, healthy or not. That was just, they got in there because of record, and honestly, I think a lot of teams that are looking up at that 4 spot that could have been there are feeling like either A, that they didn't have a chance, or maybe they did have a chance and they feel like Oklahoma got exposed and they should have been in that spot and they would have played better. But who knows? Maybe Georgia does get in there and make some noise, even though they had to unfortunately lose in the championship game. So that kind of removed them from that contention spot. Maybe Georgia would have put up a better fight. I don't know if they would have won, but I feel like Georgia might have put a better up a fight. Regardless, it definitely doesn't need to be placed another 4 teams placed in a playoff scenario in college, just because the talent level is very there's the top, the apex mountain of talent, and then there's everybody else. And what we saw was the everybody else go up against the Giants, and you saw what was on display when that was the case. So I'm tired of hearing about it. I don't think it's necessary. The fix for the 4-person playoff was in fact to help other teams get involved and maybe have a chance, because the BCS was a little bit biased in some people's eyes, and they felt like having 4 people in a playoff would show who is the best for real. Well, we're seeing it now, honestly. We're seeing it now, who is the best. Now, granted, you can argue that because of the college football playoff, we saw Clemson and Ohio State have a really good game, and Clemson ended up coming out on top in that one. But that's not everyday occurrence. There's always a first round just blowout. That's not good for the sport, really, or the collegiate sport. It's just weird. These are supposed to be the best of the best teams, and we're getting blowouts. No one wants to see that. That's not entertaining. All that does is make you question who is good and who is not, and why is this even existing? Why do we even need this? All right, so far from that, I want to talk a little bit about Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons for Penn State, sophomore linebacker, All-American. He is going to win a lot of awards next year. Yesterday against Memphis, he was flying around. When I mean flying around, he was flying around. This young man is a special player. I can't wait to see what he does next year when he gets, essentially, he's going to get drafted in the first round. I don't know how high, but I think he's going to be he might be a top 10 talent, potentially. When I tell you he stuffed the stat sheet yesterday, when I was watching that game before the LSU game came on, it was just incredible to watch. He was flying around. He was moving around. He's like that type of guy he's 6'3", 245, but he's really fast. He could probably play a little bit of DN, maybe, at the next level if he decided to. If the team, he could just move around. He can be inside linebacker. He has the speed to be outside and cover people. He was in the flat routes. He was just a menace, causing all different types of stuff. He almost caught an interception in a really, really heads up play that he just blew up the play. It should have been a catch, but he just came around and used his athleticism to go stop that. And he just has a impact attitude. He reminds me a little bit Manti Te'o mixed with some Tyrann Mathieu, maybe. He's dynamic. He's a big time player. So I'll look out for his name for sure when it comes to players to watch as far as awards next year. And if Penn State really gets the ball rolling off early, because I'm sure they'll be ranked pretty high in the top 10 next year, coming into the polls, I am fairly certain if he does what he needs to do, not only will he be the showrunner for Defensive Player of the Year, he really might be even a possible Heisman candidate if that is that something he's trying to achieve and that team can really get the ball rolling. But coming up in the next segment, we're going to get a little bit into that LSU Oklahoma recap. We're going to talk about what happened in the game on a more complete level, just what happened, what comes out from it now, and what do we need to look for heading towards the future of the college football playoffs. Coming up.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so let's get right back into it. Let's go ahead and start talking about some LSU Oklahoma recap stuff. So LSU sure-handedly defeats Oklahoma in a really, really big blowout in the college football playoff, and it wasn't even close. LSU came out the gates really firing on all cylinders offensively, and then their defense really set a tone early on to prove a point. And that really, I think that shook Oklahoma. I don't think Oklahoma thought their defense would be as aggressive as it was early on. And that just kind of snowballed into a lot of bad things going on in that game for Oklahoma to start off with. Let's talk about that targeting call, because it's very interesting, the parallels of the targeting calls in both of these games. So this one was actually the right call, in my opinion. That young man didn't have any reason to hit the player the way he did, especially just the way the ball came out, and it didn't look like it was going to be essentially catchable in the first place. But it was definitely intentional helmet to helmet. It was just a bad look, and he had to go. And it's unfortunate because you don't really want to see anybody get kicked out of the biggest games of their season, of their career, so to speak. And that's how you end it off prematurely, and young man got taken out in the game. And I don't think that changed the momentum of the LSU Oklahoma game, just because it was just all over the place. But I'm definitely sure that there was a essence, there was a vibe on the field at that point to where this might be too much for Oklahoma to handle. And it definitely appeared so on the scoreboard. Where does this rank in Joe Burrow's best performances of the year? I would assume it's top 3 just by pure raw numbers, but I don't know. It's weird to say that a college football playoff is not a big impact game. It wasn't like this performance wasn't the biggest impact game of his career thus far, just because I feel like that performance against Alabama or even the SEC championship game felt more impactful to Joe Burrow's draft stock, his career, his legacy as the LSU quarterback that is going to bring them to the national title is more important than this. And maybe it's just because Oklahoma just wasn't that big of a competition for them. He said it himself, like, this is what they were supposed to do. Now, I don't know if that's just being really confident or he's being performative for the media's sake. And, he takes up a lot from Orgeron and how they handle their business. LSU is very much, they have a like mindset over there. All the players do. And they take after their head coach. But they they definitely handled their business and did what they're supposed to do. I know a lot of people were trying to say what Oklahoma had to do in order to beat LSU, which was to try and expose their inconsistent defensive play, but no one really knew what Oklahoma's defense was going to be able to do to stop the barn burner offense that LSU possesses, and it was very easy to kind of just forget that LSU, they played Alabama, who is a much better defense than Oklahoma, and put up almost 50 on them. So we got to remember these type of things and put these in the back of our minds. And even Georgia had a beautifully top-ranked defense, and LSU sliced them up. There's not a defense, I'm sure, in college football that's stopping LSU at this point. Like I said a week ago, at this point, at the top of the apex mountain of these teams, defense is not really thrown out the window, but it's all about big plays, because at the end of the day, these offenses are too good. They just cut up and down your defense. They know how to read the secondaries. They know how to read defenses. They're just looking at your weaknesses, and they're exploiting them in the highest degree possible. They're going to try their best to exploit them. And even when your defense has a good chance of getting a stop, your quarterbacks are just too mobile. They know how to move around the pocket. They know how to make plays with their legs. They know how to keep their eyes down the field. And look, Joe Burrow especially is really, really good at pocket mobility and still keeping his eyes down the field, because he just doesn't look to run that often. But when he does, the defense is kind of stunned, because he doesn't do it as often as you think he would as a college quarterback. He just really, really, his vision, his way to look through all his reads, even when things are breaking down in the pocket, he's just stone cold. He just doesn't have any fear when it comes to being involved in the pocket, and just is able to sling the football down the field and make really big plays, along with having guys like Justin Jefferson, who had the biggest game of his career, 4 touchdowns in a half. That's ridiculous. I've never seen somebody do something like that. And he was catching in double coverage. He was catching one-on-one. He was beating people down the field. He was just a man amongst boys out there, so to speak. The talent level was very skewed, man. It was not a good look for Oklahoma. So what does this mean for Oklahoma football? Honestly, I'm not too sure. I think the committee is probably going to start looking at Oklahoma a little bit with a conditional eye, so to speak, when it comes to their rankings now. This is the second time in 3 years that Oklahoma's been blown out in the college football playoff. And it's just starting to see some tendencies here. And we're going to talk a little bit about Lincoln Riley in a few, but to preview, we don't really know what this means for Lincoln Riley's career as a head coach, because some people think he has been exposed a bit, and the whole idea of him being an offensive guru, but only really didn't really have a dog in this fight. And how much do you blame this on him, or how much do you blame this on the scenario of just they weren't that competitive to LSU? They weren't going to be that competitive to Clemson. They probably weren't going to be nearly as competitive to Ohio State. And that was just the reality of the situation. Doesn't mean that he's a bad head coach or he was exposed. It just means other teams were highly more talented, and that was just being put on display for everybody to watch this time. And if you've been watching college football, you probably knew this was the outcome, or close to the outcome, as it was going to be, just because they're just not, out of all the 4, they were the weakest link. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew that there was a very slim chance of them making this game competitive to all 4 quarters of football. We just didn't think it would be in the very first 3 minutes of the game that it was going to be obvious to see that this was going to be a tough outcome for Oklahoma. So it was just an interesting game from looking from a retrospective lens. So honestly, I don't know where this takes Oklahoma and that the head coach there. It's just it might just be a case of it is what it is, and I think people are blowing up just because of the scale of it being a national championship race and the college football playoffs. So more people are watching. So now people think that that was a waste of time of the game. Maybe somebody thinks that they should have put Georgia back in, or whatever the case may be. But it definitely was not something that Lincoln Riley was wanting to happen to his team. So that was just a tough call. Of course, LSU, though, now we got to think about what their chances are to finish off this magical season. And I really think they have a good chance of getting it done. Their offense is, of course, probably the best in college football. Their defense is serviceable. It's not the best. It's not the worst. It's definitely better than what people proclaim that it is. And I think they put that on display and they wanted to prove something to all these doubters that say LSU's defense is not that good and they're going to get exposed in the playoff. Well, it's hard to expose a defense when their offense puts up 30-something points and a half or 40-something points and a half. They had more points than the Pelicans did in the first half of both of their games. But we're coming up. We're going to talk about some more Lincoln Riley stuff. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation throughout the next few months. So we're going to talk about him.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and get right into where does this take Lincoln Riley? Has Lincoln Riley been exposed? Has the Oklahoma offensive system been figured out? Has it just been the conference they play in? Has it been just overhype? Maybe it's the Sean McVay effect going on in college football. Well, I'm here to tell you I don't know, to be honest. I don't think he's been exposed. I don't think this means that he shouldn't have offers coming out the NFL. But it definitely is something to look at for down the road because at this point he's been noted as one of the best coaches in college football, one of the best offensive mind, if not the best offensive mind in college football. And NFL teams have been trying to take him away from that program for a little bit now. So he definitely has people looking to be involved in whatever he has going on. But this loss does not look good for his resume as a head coach. And you don't really know where that will take you at the end of the day. Now, does that mean I don't think he can be a NFL head coach, a good one? I don't think so. I think he could be a good coach. I think he is a good coach. This might be one of those things where people are so caught up in you have to be dominant all the time. So, and by dominant, I mean you have to win the title. Now, don't get it confused. Winning a title is a lot, and it means a lot, and it definitely propels you into other conversations that others who don't have a title definitely cannot get to and achieve without having one, and without having many, and showing that they can get to that that point. Being a coach and winning a national championship is the goal every year. That should be the goal. But when you are talented as far as your coaching ability, when you can have your team in the picture every year, I think that means something. And although some people think that the committee has been putting Oklahoma in when they haven't been the best team, that's up for debate. But you only play who you are scheduled to play in college football, and they get the job done. Their offense, when they do play other people, is dynamic, and they're able to put up a lot of points. And their defense hasn't always been the best, but that just seems to be something that maybe that's just a fact of the matter of the conference they play in, or just the way the college football has become in a sense. It's hard to find a team that's like stifling on the defensive end against really talented offensive teams. It's just hard to find. Even in the SEC, which used to be known as a defensive, real pro level talent place to play in and to learn and to go up against week in and week out, you're facing Sunday talented people. Even they give up a lot of points now. I think that's just the way that college football has just kind of become and digressed too. And I think this might be a little bit of the same way people have been looking at Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. Like I talked about last week, I think that people need to pump the brakes and realize that it's hard to find good coaches that can really push you to where you need to be. And if Lincoln Riley is a winner throughout most of the season and can get you somewhere, and he hasn't been there for that long, and he's been getting you into the playoffs, it's not like the Jim Harbaugh situation totally. Jim Harbaugh hasn't been able to beat Ohio State, which definitely hurts them from getting into the playoffs every year. Same thing with before at Orgeron. LSU would have some good seasons, and they would be ranked a little bit higher than they used to be. And they go up against Nick Saban in Alabama, and that would just be the end of the season. Oklahoma hasn't had that Nick Saban, hasn't had that Urban Meyer or that Austin Day to really to check them at the door, so to speak. So they've been able to kind of get into these playoffs essentially unchecked and not battle tested enough, in my opinion, to really warrant them getting into the college football playoffs so often. And that's why you see a lot of these blowouts, because we weren't facing really, really strong, talented teams. But I don't think that means that Lincoln Riley is a bad coach, or he shouldn't be looking to move on, or he doesn't deserve the looks that he has been getting, or if he's been exposed. I just don't think that's fair to say. Because at the end of the day, you're only as good as your record says you are, and they had a really good record. And they lost some players. They weren't at full strength, and that's not an excuse. It's next man up. It's just clearly that without all those players that were suspended and their DB that was hurt and couldn't play, it just didn't seem like they were on all four cylinders. And that was just the end-all, be-all of that game. And it was just a tough thing to witness live, honestly. Maybe all of this is really just some shock value. We're forgetting that Lincoln Riley really is one of the best offensive minds in football, just because of how dramatic of a loss that really was, and that never looks good for anybody. Nobody looks good in a loss like that. I say the Sean McVay effect because this season has been a real big disappointment for the LA Rams, right? And a lot of people have been looking at Sean McVay in the same light as a year ago. He was the next golden boy. He was the guy who couldn't lose, the next guy who was going to be the head coach in the National Football League. And this season has just been weird to watch for him and for that team, because they just can't get it done offensively anymore. And they haven't been able to do so all season long. So a lot of people have been looking like, well, maybe Sean McVay's been figured out. Has he been exposed? Maybe he isn't as great of an offensive mind as we all proclaimed him to be. And the loss of or the decline of Todd Gurley so dramatically has really hurt that team. And Jared Goff may not be as good as he was that we thought he might have become in a year. And he looks like he's regressed quite a bit. And it's just hard to see what's the culprit there. And I think we're seeing a lot of that, a lot of similar parallels with Lincoln Riley. Maybe not so much just through the play of the players, but just the same questions, the same thoughts. And I think that's just a part of the big media age that we're in, where one game changes the whole outcome of how we look at people now, because we're able to talk about it so easily. Everything isn't, we don't digest things. We kind of go off of the very last thing somebody did, and that's the end all be all, really, until the next thing they do, until they prove something otherwise. And it's just very instantaneous in how we judge coaches, we judge players all the time, and these big impact games. And I guess it's fair to say that, we're fair to criticize, and it's good to criticize people in big moments. But we tend to do as a unit, we judge these people in big time moments and don't take the whole season into account sometimes. And we just look at it like, well, this was what they were working all the way towards, so we have to throw everything else out the window. And they just couldn't get it done. And I just don't think that's fair to Lincoln. I don't think that's fair to Sean McVay. I don't think that's fair to Jim Harbaugh. I don't think that's fair. So you got to be able to look at the whole body of work of what they've been able to do before we sit there and say, oh, they're a bad coach. Oh, they're overrated. And that's just my stance on that. Where does that take Oklahoma football? I'm really not too sure. You only can play people who you play against in your schedule. But I do think this loss definitely will make the committee look at them in a different light, because I don't think they've proven anything in the past 3 years that makes them deserve these spots, really. Because each time, like I said earlier, they 2 out of 3 just been blowouts. So clearly the competition level has been skewed a bit as far as that 4th spot or wherever they've been in the past, and it just hasn't been accurate enough to place in. Now, the argument to that is who really is. And that's why in the earlier segment we talked about not expanding the playoffs, because this is what we would be seeing more and more. Blowouts. And no one wants to sit there and plan out a Saturday or a Sunday or a Friday, wherever they would have extra games if they expanded it. Nobody wants to see blowouts. No one wants to plan their weekends around blowouts. And that's just the end all be all. So, we're going to get into the next segment after this break. We're going to talk about Ohio State Clemson. And we're just going to see where exactly Clemson can improve, where they can look to exploit for LSU coming up.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, welcome back. So let's go ahead and get into our next topic, which is Ohio State versus Clemson. A really good game. I liked watching it. It was very interesting. And I had a lot of stake in Clemson coming out to win this game. I've been stated saying that it would be interesting to see just how they would come out. And I thought they had a lot of chances to make some big plays in this game before the game started. And I thought that their experience of being there before, Trevor Lawrence, Dabo Swinney, they've been there before. They know what it takes to get there. They've been in tough situations. they've battled really good teams and was able to come out on top. So I think that experience was going to be able to help them if they got punched in the mouth by Ohio State. And there was a lot of people thinking that this was just going to be an easy game because Clemson hasn't played anybody, so to speak, and they've just been blowing out bad teams and, handling business like they're supposed to do. So I was very interested to see where Clemson was going to take this game. And I'll be honest, I was kind of worried in the first quarter because it didn't look like Clemson really had it going right now and at that moment in time in the game. And let me just go ahead and get this out the way, and we can talk about the targeting call. That shouldn't have been called a targeting call. That definitely changed a lot of momentum in the game. I'm not ignoring that fact. I acknowledge it. I think it was a bad call. And honestly, I don't know how you look at that replay and think that for the momentum part of this game, the biggest potential change of the game, this was a third down play. It would have been fourth down, would have had to punt. And it was going to, instead of a 4th and 15, it was a first down and a touchdown. That's just a really, really big play that changed the momentum of the game, surely and wholeheartedly. So I don't think that was a good call whatsoever. All right, so looking past that, Clemson just kept fighting. Ohio State was throwing everything at them. Kitchen sink, the car in the garage, the refrigerator, the guest refrigerator in the other room, the elliptical in the sunroom. They were throwing everything out at them. And, Clemson just would not bow down. And that run by Trevor Lawrence was everything you would want to see out of somebody who knew that they had to fight. So, first of all, that run was amazing to see. It's funny because he didn't look like he reached top speed for himself pretty early in the run, and he just kind of willed himself into the end zone. I thought he was going to get caught, honestly, but he found himself in there, and that was just one of the 3 big time plays that he was able to make. Just being able to use his mobility and just really, really savvy quarterback who knew what he had to do. It was like a great performance almost because he was getting hit a lot. Justin Fields was getting hit a lot. But Ohio State, they were trying to punish Trevor Lawrence because they were really doing a lot of this option running down the field, using him as a runner, his legs as a weapon. And Ohio State, they were coached to say, all right, keep trying it. We're going to pop you. It's going to hurt. And Trevor Lawrence just had to keep getting back up. And, it looked like some of those hits looked like they really hurt. Like the hit that substantially changed the game, of course, was the one that got a young player ejected. And Trevor Lawrence stayed on the ground for quite some time. I thought he was going to be shaken up and hurt, and he kept playing through the pain and the bad passes because honestly, he didn't have the best game, in my opinion. It wasn't the surgical Trevor Lawrence game that he was displaying throughout the season as he was getting back into the swing of things, but he still played a really good game. I think he put out a lot of heart. That team showed a lot of heart because there was many times in that game where Ohio State was just throwing haymakers left and right. And they just wouldn't go down. They kept getting up. And at a certain point, I thought Ohio State was going to lose just because of the war of attrition. They didn't look like they had the dog in them anymore. Chase Young was impactful in spots, but he didn't really, to me, I don't think he impacted the game as much as I thought he would. And I think that's just it was good coaching, good planning by Dabo Swinney. They really tried to take him out of the game as much as they could. Now, he's still probably the most talented player in college football, and he'll probably be going number 2 overall in the draft. But he didn't look like the most talented football player in college football on that day. He was getting doubled quite a bit. There were some calls that weren't made as far as holding that you could see. But that's generally football. Not every hold is getting called. There's probably holding on every play. in football. So if you're whining about calls that weren't made, do you really even like the sport anymore? We don't know. But there was just some big plays that were made and some big swinging momentum changes. Like the next big call that I guess I'll have to talk about is the ruled non-catch. It was an incompletion pass, but on the field it was ruled a fumble, and it was a touchdown Ohio State, and it was called back. And honestly, I think this is a conversation that we need to have as a football community. We need to stop letting slow motion replay dictate every single call, every single way we look at things, because at the end of the day, the play happened full speed, and it was more of a bang-bang play, full speed, which made me feel like it was an incompletion rather than slowing it down, because that's just not how the game is played. The game is played at 100% all effort, full speed, right? When we start implementing slow-mo, not for a toe tap, not for a offsides, or not for something that requires really, really quick precision, right? This is not for somebody crossing the goal line. This is for a bang-bang play of incompletion. Now, this wasn't like this guy held the ball. I just don't feel like he had possession. Just the way he was holding on to the ball, and just the way that DB swiped the ball out of his hands, it just looked a little bit too quick to be ruled a completion. It didn't feel like a natural fumble animation to me. Or not animation, or natural fumble movement. And honestly, it definitely did change the game as far as Ohio State. A lot of people feel like the game was being too refereed, in their opinion. And in some aspects, I agree. In other aspects, I think that it wasn't a bad call. And you got to keep playing. And Ohio State did keep playing. Ohio State didn't make a lot of excuses. They played to the last second of the game, essentially. And that's what you like to see. Of course, Justin Fields, that throw in the end zone that looked to be like a miscommunication between him and the wide receiver. That was a tough play to watch, honestly. I didn't think anybody wanted the game to end like that. If you're an Ohio State fan, if you're a Clemson fan, you probably were happy regardless. But they were really driving down the field, and that's just something that I'm sure they're going to wish that throw never happened. They could have it back, but you can't. So it was just a tough throw. There was nobody around him. It looked like it was going to be, he just suspected something else. And sometimes that just happens in football. It just sucks that happened at really the worst possible time that could ever happen. So you just got to have to take that on the chin. So what does this mean for Clemson going forward, I suppose? So going forward, they have to play LSU, and honestly, I'm not too sure how this game's going to go. Clemson's defense is way, way better, of course, than Oklahoma's, but at the same time, you gotta look at it from this perspective. I think Ohio State had a pretty decent time moving the ball down the field against Clemson. And Clemson got a lot of breaks in that game. And LSU is not going to be any easier as far as stopping them on offense. And honestly, their wide receiver weapons might be 10 times better than Ohio State's. So we're going to have to really see what they can bring to the table. All right. So coming up after this break, we're going to talk about some Jalen Hurts as he played his last collegiate football game of his career. And we're going to take a look at his career, how that might affect his draft stock as playing quarterback. Will he play quarterback, or will NFL teams advise him to go in as a quarterback? That's what we're going to talk about coming up next.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast. And now we're going to get into some Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts played his last collegiate football game on Saturday against LSU, and of course it did not go the way he would like it to have gone. And now we're going to take a quick look back at what his career really surmounted to. Now, Jalen Hurts was a highly respected quarterback coming into his career. So let's get into it, right? So Jalen Hurts, true freshman coming out of Alabama. He had a really good rookie year, and he lost to Clemson. That was a big Deshaun Watson game. I remember that live, and I thought he was going to be good for the next 2 years or so. So I thought he had a real good chance of getting back there. And of course, the next year, he gets Alabama to a 13-1 record, but his play kind of declined near the tail end of that. And that's when the Tua era started because, of course, infamous benching at halftime and putting in Tua against Georgia, and Tua coming back and winning that game for Alabama. And ever since then, people have been kind of weird about just where he was going to be as far as Jalen Hurts is concerned. We didn't know if he was going to get a starting job back, and it didn't seem to be the case. And then we got, of course, the situation where he decides to transfer to a different school because he's thinking about his future career, going to the NFL. You have to start. You have to put up numbers. You have to give people enough stats and film to look at you and evaluate you as a quarterback. And honestly, you don't want your last effort to be the guy who was benched in the national title game and they still won it. So that's just really tough. So what did he do? He stayed for his junior year, of course, on the bench. Now, this is what I really enjoyed about Jalen Hurts' career, because he wasn't somebody who complained about it. And national media didn't pick up any complaints from him. That would definitely have been a story. But he did his job. He sat there, learned, decided to stay as a backup for a year. And he had a big moment against Georgia to get the Alabama Crimson Tide into the playoffs because Tua got hurt. And he ended up helping finish off the game against Georgia and getting Alabama a security spot in the playoffs. So after that, that's when he decided to, of course, transfer and go to Oklahoma, where he had another Heisman-esque season. He didn't win it, of course, but he was very good for a majority of the season. And unfortunately, it had to end this way for him. For a very interesting college football career. It's kind of unprecedented what he's gone through, you know. His first year was dynamic. He got a lot of accolades as a quarterback. He brought his team to the national championship. And, you know, you look like the next biggest star. You know, there was a star in every season for quarterbacks. Like this year, of course, it's Joe Burrow. But we even thought that Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence should have been the big star coming out of the season, but that just ended up happening. You never really know. And then, I forgot even about Tua. Tua definitely was probably the biggest quarterback to come out of especially since he was getting drafted this year. He was probably the biggest quarterback to really be talked about in national media and like what's going to happen with him and is he going to win the Heisman, and it's just you never really know what's going to happen until the season plays out. But it's just it's very interesting to see what his stats were. 72 touchdowns to 16 interceptions career, passer rating of 165, and he had 38 rushing touchdowns in his career, which is really good. 2,000, almost 3,000 yards rushing. Just a really interesting player. Does this mean that no one knows where he's going to be projected in the draft? I definitely don't know where he might get drafted, what he might get drafted for. Now, there's still those people who believe that people who play quarterback for majority of their careers in college somehow needs to convert, which I'm glad Lamar Jackson has decided to say enough of that. And if you make a scheme around these players, you will get the best out of them, and you're tired of putting them in a box because of what they are able to do, and you're trying to, your head coach ego or your offensive coordinator's ego is too large to adjust to the player that gets drafted and brought into the facilities. So I am not one of those people who believe Jalen Hurts needs to go into the draft for anything other than quarterback. I think he has the talent to be in the league. I don't know if he'll ever be a starter per se, but I definitely think he has the talent to be in the league, and he should feel pride. He should be proud of what he's able to accomplish in college. He got his degree, and he is able to move on into the next level, and he has next level talent. So that's how I feel about that. People are weird about this whole running quarterback situation going on in the NFL, because there's a difference between being able to run and being mobile in the pocket. And everybody wants somebody who has pocket mobility, but not everybody wants somebody who is able to run and pick up yardage and stuff down the field. So when you look at someone like a Lamar Jackson, you look at someone who is not as athletic, but can still make some things happen, in a Jalen Hurts, people start to get cold feet on why they don't feel like these guys can't pass the ball down the field and can't read a defense, and that's just not fair. Now, I will say that it might be something interesting to look at as far as the whole Lincoln Riley Oklahoma experiment, just because what we're seeing out of Baker Mayfield, when Baker was with Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma, of course, he was dynamic. He was able to make plays down the field, just like Jalen Hurts, and he was a playmaker. Right now on Cleveland, he's not a playmaker, and he's borderline a bad starter. So that's gonna be interesting to see as far as Jalen goes into the draft, and what teams look for him to make some plays. But honestly, I don't think that will affect Jalen per se, just because of where he came from. He's an Alabama kid as far as being where he first left, and he took a lot of those lessons from Nick Saban with him to Oklahoma too, as you can hear it in his interviews and stuff that he says. He's definitely an Alabama product in some aspect, and he was there for 3 years. I mean, it's hard to pick up the MO of somebody who was with one of the best collegiate football teams ever, and then going to another really good football team with a head coach that is really offensive minded and seen as a genius. And he still found success there. So clearly the talent is there from Jalen Hurts, and I wish nothing but the best for him. And I think that people who are trying to say that he needs to go play wide receiver or go play running back or has to be in limited spots are really short-sighted and don't see the potential of what the NFL is turning into, which is a league that you cater towards you build around. It's no longer the league where you don't build around the quarterback anymore. Especially if you feel like the quarterback is talented enough to have something more and bring something to the table outside of like a pocket passer. Now, people like pocket passers because it's easier to build around, but if you have somebody who is dynamic on and is a two-way player, so to speak, as far as with their legs and with their arm, you have to restructure what your offense can do. And a lot of people are not willing to do that. And that's just the end all be all. So for the last segment coming up after this break, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite college football players to watch during this last decade. As you know, 2020 is almost upon us. So that will be coming up right after this break.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, so last segment of the day, we're going to talk about some of the best players that I watched during the decade and some of my favorites. So I'm going to get some out the way early because they came at the latter half of the decade. So, of course, Cam Newton is somebody who I always enjoyed watching, and he had a really big-time season right before he went into the draft in 2011. So, he barely makes the cut there. And then Mark Ingram as well, Heisman Trophy winners, both of them. But someone who I thought was really, really good in college, of course, was Jadeveon Clowney. Now, Jadeveon Clowney was one of those players that when first coming out, he was a monster on the defensive end. He was arguably the best defensive end coming out during the draft. And then his career went kind of weird in the NFL at first. Didn't seem like he was hurt. Didn't know if he was going to pan out, but of course he's definitely panning out now. But he was super, super athletic, and he was one of those stories where he made a big play, and then everybody started to follow him and realize that he was so good. And then he kind of took his pedal off the gas, or took his feet off the pedal for a little bit for the remainder of his college career. And people were criticizing him for his effort and for giving up on his team and other things like that. But I always thought he was just a really, really amazing player and somebody who, anybody would want on their team because it's become a pass rush league, and his value to teams now is just insurmountable. Next player I would say is Robert Griffin III. When he was coming out of college, he was everything. He was the Lamar before Lamar. And he's not as athletic as Lamar, but just his talent to throw the ball and move in the pocket and move on the run at Baylor was just so fun to watch. That Baylor team was incredible, and it was just so interesting. And I just never thought we'd see a player like him like that before. And he was just really a rock star. When he came into the league, he was what everybody talked about. You got to remember, this was the Andrew Luck RG3 draft, and Andrew Luck also was in this class too, and he was equally as dynamic. But everybody knew Andrew Luck was going to be good, but we didn't know if Robert Griffin III was not just going to be good, but was be good like all-time great. And just watching him that first season, and then kind of got derailed by injury, was so hard to watch. But the first season was so good. It was so much fun to watch him play in the NFL. But college-wise, he was amazing. I loved watching him play. Another quarterback, of course, would be Deshaun Watson. Now, Deshaun Watson some people are calling him the MJ of football. And by MJ, I mean Michael Jordan. Just by the way he's able to make things happen. and just his winner mentality. He's a winner. He does anything he needs to do to get the job done. He won't have the best game, and he will still find a way to win. He's a gamer, and watching him beat Alabama that year in the national title was just incredible. He called game. It was just something that I've never seen out of a quarterback before, and he really changed the scope. And the thing that he went 11th overall in the draft when he did come out was kind of ridiculous, because I don't see how people passed up on him or what they thought of him beforehand. But clearly he's proving a lot of people wrong now, and I'm sure a lot of people regret passing up on him. As you know, it's just a hit or miss league when it comes to drafting in the first round sometimes. And there's definitely surefire talent, but there's always, like, quarterbacks are always weird. You never really know how they pan out. Another player is Derrick Henry for Alabama, who Alabama's had a ton of great running backs over the years, and some of them pan out, some of them don't. And you always wondered if it's just a system that makes running backs look really good at Alabama, or is it their talent? Well, Derrick Henry's talent is unquestioned. He is amazing. He was amazing for them. He definitely was the most physically imposing running back I've ever watched. As far as a runner, he's just a bulldozer. He's fast. He's strong. He's literally a linebacker playing running back. It's kind of ridiculous to really think about that, but that man is humongous. A humongous player. And he's just bulldozing over everybody. He still is on the Titans, and he still has that speed that was just, for somebody his size, you couldn't think was possible. And then you had Bo Scarborough last year, who was doing similar things, and now he's over there with the Lions. Another Alabama player that was cool was C.J. Mosley, the linebacker. He's amazing. Like, you want to talk about some linebackers that are really good and really had impact straight coming into the league. C.J. Mosley's impact was immediately felt. And you just don't see that too often. Sometimes it takes a longer time for players to really adjust to the NFL game. But he was intuitive from the jump. And he just figured it out. Like, Jadeveon didn't figure it out at first. And that's typically the case for defensive ends. They take longer to really look at how the NFL game is played from their position, what they need to do, how they have to prepare, how to figure out how to get past these super good NFL linemen and savvy, smart players. And C.J. Mosley kind of just started hitting the ground running as soon as he got drafted by the Ravens. So that was just always interesting. Of course, there's Joey Bosa, there's Jameis Winston, who, it's kind of crazy to look at Jameis Winston and how he's become this weird player now in the NFL, where either it's literally Jekyll and Hyde with him at any given moment of the game. But coming out of Florida State, he didn't lose for like 2 years. He legit did not lose for 2 years. And it was insane to watch him really grow as a player, because his first season was dynamic as it gets, and he goes to national championship, wins the game, and then the next year he keeps on winning. He was that quarterback that just kept having win streaks and didn't lose very often. But then as his play kind of declined as he kept going, he started to become more turnover happy, and that just translated to the National Football League as well. And that's just really interesting to see. Then we have another player who I thought was really good, and his NFL career hasn't panned out, or didn't pan out as well as we thought it would be, is Johnny Manziel. Now, Johnny Manziel might be the biggest star in college football ever. Like, I don't think the way national media gravitated to Johnny Manziel, I've never seen before in my life. And definitely in this decade, he probably was the biggest star coming out of the draft. He was everybody's darling. He beat Alabama. He never really made it to the title game, right? But just the way he was playing, being able to move out move out the pocket, make really big time throws, and his clutch gene. People were so ready to see him go to the next level. But there was always questions about if he was going to be able to perform at the next level. But he still ended up going pretty high in the draft. Like, he didn't go first overall. He still got drafted by Cleveland. But his career didn't pan out for him. But in college, he's a legend, man. He got a statue. Of course, he was signing autographs back then too. But yeah, he was a phenomenal player back then. Let me see, who else have I may have forgotten? I guess Saquon. Saquon was big. I didn't really watch Saquon that much. I heard about him late. But Saquon was, if you look at his stats and just what he was doing over there at Penn State, he was a big time runner, and you could see why he was so talented coming out of the draft. Because with the Giants, he might, like, in a few years, he might be the best running back in the league. Probably, maybe even next year, between him and Christian McCaffrey. But yeah, man, that's just a amazing group of guys. This decade was really big on talent this decade. So that's it for the GSMC College Football Podcast. I'd like to thank you for listening to us, and please like and subscribe. Make sure you leave a nice review, and all the feedback is wanted and needed so that we can make this podcast the best it can possibly be. So once again, it's the College Football Podcast hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like you and encourage you to go follow us on our social media platforms. That's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I'd hope you have a wonderful week, wonderful weekend, and see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.